Hello and welcome to this very special edition of the Irish Wrestling Podcast. My name, as always, is Mark O'Brien at Wrestling Mobs. I'm joined today by a very special guest, someone I'm very familiar with, but a lot of you may not be. He's somebody with a very unique appreciation of wrestling, a very unique take on wrestling, that has got a lot of plaudits and a lot of insight from a lot of people across the media sphere in particular. His name is Craig William. A lot of you may follow him through PWMusings online. I've done some work with him as well. His own approach to wrestling, as I said before, has gotten a lot of plaudits, a lot of curiosity from many different people across the media and wrestling sphere. And I thought it'd be somebody very worthwhile to reach out to and have a discussion about his own background and his own appreciation for wrestling. So, Craig, listen, thank you very, very much for joining us. First of all, how are you doing today?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm doing very well. This is the first podcast I've done in probably like a year. So yeah, I'm feeling very self-conscious, but I'm sure it'll be fine.
Well, you look great, and I see it's lovely Scottish weather behind you there. So listen,
Yes.
yeah, so it's about 20 odd degrees here in Ireland, hence why don't have any sleeves
All
on,
right. Okay.
and I'm sweating, yeah, profusely currently. So listen, I won't take up too much of your time today. I was hoping you can kind of give Irish wrestling fans a bit more about your own personal background, like how your own journey into the wrestling media space began, and kind of your own interests, takes, and whatnot, and why you have cultivated such a following.
Yeah, so I'm here because I started trying to put together statistics for wrestling matches in the same kind of vein that you might see for for sports. So primarily from football, that was where I kind of came at it from. Like, and is there any point to displaying a wrestling match like they show football games? So the one I've always used an example is Liverpool losing 2-0 to Burnley a few years ago, and as a Liverpool fan, being a bit peeved about that, reading the match report, looking at the match statistics, and it's like 82% possession for Liverpool. I don't know, like 19 shots on target. Burnley have 2 shots on target and win 2-0, that kind of thing. So that kind of tells you a little bit, like, that tells you a little bit more about it. So I started this kind of idea of, can I do it for wrestling matches, and sitting down and I think it was like King of the Ring, like 2018, not the best matches, but like kind of figuring out how many strikes or grapples or even dives, like Cedric Alexander and Mustafa Ali, whoever else was in that tournament many years ago, and sort of putting all that together. That's kind of the basic idea to what I try and do.
Yeah, and listen, I've a huge appreciation for the detail and the work you put in for every single match, like the painstaking detail you go to, and like accounting, listing the amount of strikes,
Uh-huh.
about grapples, different types of offense, different types of submissions, whatnot for each wrestler, and it is a very, very unique take. And you've got a lot of bad faith fans online who would probably look at that and say that's not how wrestling's supposed to be digested, but
Absolutely.
it's just something different. It's obviously something just you started as something quite fun for yourself, and obviously
Mhm.
from that you've kind of grown PW Musings, Pro Wrestling Musings, which is again a hugely interesting site and a hugely interesting breadth of takes and different ways of analyzing. Maybe it might be one product, might be just an episode of AEW Dynamite, but
Mhm.
you've got 4 or 5 different people reviewing it in different manners, all with different takes
Uh-huh.
and all with different appreciations. And I think with the way kind of the world is generally speaking now, that you're not allowed to have more than one opinion on a lot of different issues.
Of
It's
course,
quite
yes.
refreshing, particularly in the wrestling tribalistic space, that you've kind of cultivated such an audience and a platform as such. How did you start to kind of put together PW Musings, and how did you start to put together such a breadth of knowledge and experience across the team?
Yeah, so I did the statistics thing. I think wrestling seems to attract fans. Either you watch it casually with your dad or whatever, and you don't think too much about it throughout the week, or you get into the weeds, which is kind of what happened to me. I started following along on Twitter years ago as I became more into it, try and get the kind of inside lane, figure, see what's going on a bit more. And then you see people that are trying to analyze it, easy for me to say. And I kind of started thinking how I could do it myself. AEW were coming along and they were talking about how they were going to do advanced statistics. New Japan were kind of talking about the statistics that they had. And it was all things like wins and losses and match lengths. So I kind of, as I spoke before, I kind of did my thing. And then I started getting a bit of a following. As you said, there's the bad faith people, but you're going to get that with anything. But
Yeah.
a lot of people are really interested. So I put it on a website and then started kind of reaching out to other people that I thought might be interested. Is there something that you could put here? And just kind of ended up building like a little bit of a very small community with that, which
Mm,
is quite nice because I'm a teacher. I have friends that I go and watch football with, but I don't really have anybody in my immediate life I would kind of talk about wrestling about with. So as much as it gets a bad rep, Twitter, Reddit, online spaces like that have given me an outlet where I can speak about wrestling in a more kind of social way, which is nice. And yeah, as you're saying, PWMusings has kind of grown in so that we have like weekly things where people try to look at AEW from like 4 or 5 people giving different viewpoints. And I think we try to just be enthusiastic and genuine and um, talk about wrestling how we want to, and trying to avoid the trappings of the online space where people are spending a little bit too much time trying to be perhaps the smartest person in the space, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
100%. And I think you've got a group of people whereby everybody has their own interests and takes, but
Mm.
everybody has a genuine appreciation for other takes, and they have a wherewithal to know that like there's more than one way to skin a cat. Like it's
Yeah,
wrestling's for
yeah.
everybody, and there's so many different interests and takes. Like even just look at the comparison, the Dynamite Collisions. They're very two different interests, and
Mm-hmm.
the Collision may lean toward more what I like. You may prefer
Uh-huh.
Dynamite or that type of wrestling as well. So you have a collection of people who's there's a great level of respect among everybody who's working in the community, and it's quite
Sure, sure.
refreshing. It's funny you kind of brought about Twitter. I've I go back and forth on Twitter. Much like yourself, I work in finance. I play rugby. I've got my own
Uh-huh.
background and things like that. But I wouldn't necessarily have a space where I go chat to people about
Sure,
wrestling as
yeah.
such.
Which I think is
Um,
quite common actually.
yeah, like I mean, we're all there's a lot of secret wrestling fans out there, but no,
Yes,
not many
yes.
people want to
Uh-huh.
actually. So you're a wrestling fan too. So
Yes.
Twitter, it does have that brilliance to it. It's a safe space to express yourself at times, but also I
Sure.
there
Safe
are
space is an interesting phrase, but yeah, I
yeah
know I know what
yeah
you mean. Yeah, it's
yeah like it
more
feels
people there. Yeah.
yeah, it feels like you can feels at times you can let down your guard a bit, but also in terms of Twitter, there's also that huge level of divisiveness and
Uh-huh.
a lot of people online just posturing that they would never behave in such a manner in real life.
Yes,
So I
yes.
think I've gone back and forth to you a couple of times when I've been in one of my moods about I can very much get on the bandwagon that Twitter's not real life
Hmm.
in such a sense, but like there are elements of it. There are obviously cohorts of people where that's just justified to those people. I've seen you kind of go back and forth with like I don't want to mention his name for too long, but like just for example, somebody as bad faith take hero Louis Dangoor, who's obviously been found out since.
Sure, sure.
But like I was in the same boat as you, kind of going back and forth with him or people of his ilk.
Uh-huh.
What's it been like for yourself, even from your own mental health perspective, to kind of rise above and ignore that type of be it critique or criticism when you're putting out like such huge levels of work,
Hmm.
be it for your statistical analysis or for your PW musings across a number of different platforms? What's it like to kind of deal with that? How challenging has it been to rise above or ignore it as well?
So that's a really complex question. And he says trying to buy time. So it's really hard when you put out something as complex as like statistics sheet. It's something that you've thought of yourself. You think it's a cool idea. You find it very interesting yourself. And it can become hard to hold on to the fact that there's a lot of other people that see what you're doing as really cool, really interesting, very different.
Mm,
And then, but like when the bad faith actors on Twitter circle, when the quote tweet dunks start happening, to kind of going in the kind of deeper Twitter language, um, it's not like you get a lot of people running into kind of help you out. It's quite uncommon on Twitter that when the pylons start happening, lots of people start to kind of have your back, to use very simple
yeah,
language. And I know why. It's because it's really difficult because these people are just being pretty unpleasant. The language is really nasty, and
mm,
there's a large number, so it's quite hard for somebody then to want to wade into that.
yeah,
Um, And I totally get that. I think the best way to do it is when these things start happening is to switch it off and go outside for a walk. But that's really easier said than done.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing a lot of on online spaces in wrestling and politics and football is people just getting drawn into really back and forth battles. And it's like people are kind of tapping into where they were at school when people are having
Mm.
that kind of, trying to get the big up, trying to get the last word so that all the other, guys hanging around. You find it really, really difficult. I find it really difficult when somebody who maybe has 12 followers and only
Yeah.
uses Twitter to be negative.
Yeah.
I find it really hard to let that go personally. And I know that a lot of other people do. Um, and I don't know why. I don't know why I find that so hard to let go. But then you see other people that get these people that have like 10,000 followers, everything they say gets critiqued and analyzed.
Mm.
And it's as if people are just looking for that one thing that they can be like, aha, that's really dumb. Um, and I don't know how those people just ignore like 25 negative comments in their tweets when they're just like, oh yeah, I really like that. That was cool. And people are just like, nope, nope, you're wrong. Nope. That must be exhausting. And I don't know
Yeah.
how people do it. And I don't know is, but what I do feel is that to me, Twitter's worth it because
Mm.
there are positive interactions that you can have. And if you're very, very careful about what you comment on, you can avoid most of the negative stuff. Um, but it does feel like most people's approach to Twitter is it's
Yeah.
terrible. We'd all be better off without it.
Yeah.
But they're still using it. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. It was a
No,
bit
it
long
it,
winded.
it
It's
does.
something
Yeah.
I do think about.
Yeah, I only asked you because I do think about it myself and I go back and forth a lot. And it's funny you mentioned like the way you kind of revert back to how you would in school in the playground.
Yeah,
And you,
yeah.
and you mentioned football as well. Like despite my accent and the name of the channel, I'm actually Scottish as well. I lived in
Okay.
Glasgow. So I was
Uh-huh.
to Glasgow till I was 8. So there's only two things I bother going on Twitter for. It's for Celtic news and for
Uh-huh.
wrestling. So like Brendan,
Sure.
yeah. So like again, I'd be going back and forth with people I don't know another part of the world arguing about Brendan Rodgers or Ange Postecoglou or
Sure.
whoever
Sure.
else. Um, but it is a funny thing, Twitter, and I do try to remind myself like there's nothing to be gained by arguing with somebody on Twitter generally because you're
Hmm.
probably inviting more criticism from a different place. That's just me personally, and I try to use my own Twitter more as a positive place and to almost use it as a notice board for things you like or things
Hmm.
you're things trying to promote or somebody you're trying to help. That's just from my own point of view.
Sure. Sure.
But like listen, for the work you do, I'm hugely appreciative of it, and I think it's absolutely fantastic in terms like I try to watch wrestling myself just to enjoy it and watch it as it is, but then sometimes I see some piece of work you put out, like you may put out a piece of work for like Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay, and you're going into the
Hmm.
detail of like
Yeah. Yeah.
every nuance for a match such as that, like of that magnitude, and a show of that magnitude, say at Wrestle Kingdom or whatever. How long would that take you to put together? How many times would you have to go through a match to kind of get those granular details down to sync level?
Well, this is the thing that I think people don't realize is it's once I can
Oh, wow.
so if I watch it once with like a notepad like on my knee so that I can see it, it's just like a little shorthand. It looks like Sanskrit. It's just like dots and squares and little symbols for each thing that's happening. Wrestling matches are actually a lot slower than people realize,
Mm.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of little flurries and then a break, get your breath, a few more little flurries. Um, Certainly the old stuff, if when you're like keeping a record of everything that happens in an old match, sometimes you're kind of there waiting like something going to happen
Yeah.
now. But yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, I can I mean, it's not always like sometimes I have to push the go back five.
Uh-huh.
The worst thing for me when I'm trying to kind of capture everything that happens in a match, if it's like a tag match, and when they do that
Mm.
standoff thing, and then they all start hitting each other, that's the like the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
have to go through that a few times. But generally, I can just watch it once, and then with
Mm.
that kind of record of what happened, I can kind of So the way I do it is I usually do like a stats thing. And then I found a way that I can also kind of show which wrestler was like in control of the
Mhm.
match, and then kind of create a like almost like a wave thing. The same way that in football matches they will quite often show that for the first 15 minutes of the match,
Yeah.
this team had the most possession in the next 15 minutes. So it's just kind of um to kind of see what of note I can find in a wrestling match and see if it is interesting to other people.
No,
I
amazing.
think that answers your question. I
Yeah.
may have forgotten what it was.
No, you're spot on. And like my follow-up question was then when you're doing that, like obviously you're not going to go through a painstaking detail for every match on the show, just because
Uh,
not every match is worth it. Would you watch a big match and would you watch a show straight through and go like, oh, I like that. I'll go back and watch that later and then do your statistical analysis. Do you always Are you able to separate, I suppose, your analytical enjoyment with your own kind of maybe escapism? As I try to approach my wrestling now and try to just forget about watching like who's selling what and just try to get that childlike
mhm.
escapism as much. Would you kind of take it in both manners?
It's really hard. It's really hard once you've started to like break things down like that. I don't know about you as
Very.
somebody that's training to be a wrestler and how that must be interesting and how that affects how you watch it. For me, I can find it quite difficult. I didn't really enjoy the main event of last week's Dynamite, the trios match with Adam Page and the Young Bucks teaming together again, and it was just because it was at the end of a 2 hour show.
Yeah.
I'd seen a lot of that kind of match before, and I just wasn't quite in the mood. Whereas when I watched the main event of Collision, the only real critique I have of that negative one is that it was too long. If they'd knocked 10 minutes off that, I would have really loved it. And it was just because it was different. It was just a different style of wrestling.
Yeah.
And I think the more you do anything, and especially when you make it, when you look at it more, it can it you need variety, and it
Mm.
and for me, I do struggle to enjoy as much wrestling as I used to. I kind of cherry pick it now. I don't watch everything. And I do use things like Cage Match to find matches that I can just skip. Like I didn't watch. I fast forwarded through Adam Cole versus Chris Jericho at Double or Nothing, and from what I've heard, I'm glad that I did,
You're dead right, yeah.
which which is good. But yeah, it can be it can. But the other thing is that when you dig deep into anything,
Mm.
you do start to notice things that you would never have noticed before, and you do really enjoy things. So
Yeah.
I enjoy watching really good wrestling matches whilst kind of taking a note of everything that happens, because I really notice every little detail, and that adds to the kind of the presentation of it. Um, Whereas if I watch a good match and I'm not noting everything down, I'll still enjoy it, but it's not quite. I've almost created a more immersive experience for myself.
Mhm.
It's odd, but yeah.
No, it's pretty cool. I think I love the way like you're able to have that level of focus. I'm quite jealous of it, to be honest, to be able to kind of watch through in such analytical
Ah,
one way through detail. But it's funny you talk about comparing the two different six-man matches. We actually had a third one recently on Monday Night Raw where they're all kind of three different.
didn't watch that.
It's actually if you're just for I watched it just purely I watched it purely for a cross
Sure.
comparison. Like I think
Yeah, that makes sense.
A Wednesday you had like everything going 100 miles an hour, everything be thrown at the
Mhm.
wall. Friday was a slow down, more simplistic version. Monday was even more slowed down, shorter version. But I think the one thing that across the three, it was like a gradual progression of crowd interaction and crowd
Okay.
levels. And like Monday was a very simplistic structure, short match between six man, but you could almost argue that was the better of the matches purely because the reaction
Mhm.
come from the crowd. If you're studying a match, like say it's a Japanese match where there's not a huge amount of crowd volume, how does that affect your own rating aside from obviously counting number of strikes or whatnot? Does that affect your score rating for a match if you're saying if you're on enjoyment, does that come into play at all?
Crowds definitely do.
Mm,
One of my favorite matches that I've ever seen was it got a Wrestling Observer Match of the Year back in the 80s.
yeah.
It's Kenta Kobashi and Kikuchi versus it's two American guys. The names have completely gone, but you'll be able to find
Yeah.
it. And it's the best crowd you've ever seen. Every time Kikuchi gets tagged into the match, the crowd lose it. Not it's an odd situation. I've never really delved further into like why they were so hot. It must have been his hometown or something, because he didn't really have a great career, this
Yeah,
guy.
yeah,
But yeah, the match is incredibly hot, and so yeah, I think crowd does make a difference. Um, I think it's made a difference to AEW over the
uh-huh.
last year, in that it's not been as hot, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's because the company just isn't as hot as it was,
yeah.
or even to its detriment, as hot as WWE seems to
Mm-hmm.
be at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. And like it is very telling, even just in the crowd numbers kind of coming across. But speaking of crowd numbers, hopefully, I might be able to come across you if you're heading down to, be it for Money in the Bank or All In this summer. Do you have any expectations for the coming weeks? Will you be traveling down for either events, or what are your hopes for, I suppose, these shows coming part of this part of the world in the coming weeks?
Yeah, so my second child is supposed to be arriving into the world
Oh,
a week after All In.
oh,
So
congratulations!
I
Yeah.
yeah, so I will not be going.
Okay.
I will not be going to London on that weekend,
Yeah.
for risk of yeah, for
Yeah.
I shan't be buying expensive tickets, because I think I
Yeah.
will have a few other responsibilties at that time of the
Yeah. Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I'm really excited about Forbidden Door.
Uh-huh.
And to be able to watch All In, I think it'll be really interesting to see what AEW does with their opportunity to have one of those kind of WrestleMania adjacent crowds. I
Yeah.
think that's a really cool kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I am very interested in Collision. It was really interesting.
Mm.
It was really interesting, the vibe that they had, certainly in the matches. Um, and I do think there's space for another kind of AEW product, as long as they make it different. But
Mm.
that main event promise kind of showed promise that they would, but whether or not they're able to kind of keep that going will be another thing.
Yeah, 100%. And like I even going down, given the time for the Buddy Matthews Andrade match, that felt completely different. That felt like almost like a throwback to the old NXT
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
takeover days. That was kind of, I love the vibe around that. But obviously, me and you have the exact same taste in AEW wrestling. We're obviously two peas in a pod, and we're all obviously expecting the best possible main event for All In, be it Jeff Jarrett versus Kenny Omega. Why should that be the main event, and why am I right?
Sorry, I have you recycled that? I didn't believe that I
I'm
was a square-headed bloke that was working in a Newcastle podcasting
yeah.
studio. um, my all-in main event would be Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson,
Okay.
personally.
Mm.
But I think there's maybe more of an argument for Omega versus MJF. Um,
Or Punk.
yeah, I don't see the vision.
Okay.
Um, I think that's a crowd reaction kind of match. I think
Yeah,
it's almost like Rock versus Hogan.
yeah.
I think I don't know. I don't know how they mesh. I'm sure they would.
Mm.
They're both very intelligent guys. Um, I don't know. I don't see that one in my head as being as exciting as the other ones. I might get I don't know. Might get pillared for that.
Yeah, Mr. Hamlet mightn't be too happy with that remark, but you're probably spot on. He does have a square head. But anyway, so, in terms of like, and obviously you'd be a huge fan of the Elite. I'm just discussing it purely because it's a topical thing. I love FTR. They're my favorite wrestlers in the whole wide world. Do you ever foresee that becoming a reality? I personally think All In might be a bit too soon. I think it's the type
Yeah.
of thing. I think it's the type of thing whereby just because somebody wants it doesn't mean you give it to them straight away. The longer you hold off and build up two separate entities, be it across Dynamite and Collision, when they do eventually come back together, on the assumption that the Elite sign new contracts also,
Mhm.
that I think it'd be a far better proposition, hopefully. Do you ever see that becoming a reality, or what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, so I've been trying really hard to see the positives in all this, especially with Collision happening. Being somebody that grew up watching WWE, and it was generally, most of the time, it was the Raw and SmackDown brand split. One of my kind of times that always sticks out in my head that I really enjoyed watching wrestling was in 2016, when they kind of resplit the
Yeah,
brands, and you had that really interesting SmackDown brand,
yeah,
and then what should have been a really exciting Raw brand that maybe didn't hit the
mm,
heights. Um, So I'm kind of hoping that it'll be like that. You've got two different kinds of shows. And then by keeping them apart, you hopefully end up with the kind of situation where every time when somebody from New Japan arrives in AEW, it's kind of like it's exciting because it seems like it shouldn't have happened, it wasn't going to happen, etc. So when you add that to all the drama and fans thinking like these guys have been literally segregated across these two brands because they cannot be together, so that Punk Omega dream match that loads of people have
Mm,
seems like it can never happen. So if you then have Kenny Omega just like walk out on Collision at the end
mm,
of a CM Punk match, that's an enormous moment. So if they do it, like, and
mm.
I think you do need to wait like 6, 12, 18 months before you can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you are risking people getting injured and stuff if you wait that long. But I do think that the brands and them splitting it like that, keeping those guys apart, could create a kind of really special moment, and it could give fans something that they thought wasn't possible, thereby making it more special, perhaps.
Spot on. And I think it's like it's what people say, the hunger is the best sauce. The hungrier
Yeah,
you
yeah,
get, the more
exactly.
better. Yeah, like it's a simple analogy for that. But listen, Craig, you've been hugely giving your time. Just for going forward for the summer ahead, for the year ahead, what can we expect from yourself in terms of from PWMusings? Do you have any projects coming up down the line, or what can fans expect? And where can fans find a lot of your fantastic work?
Yeah, so I'm like halfway through a watch through of all Japan. I've been trying to take like the best 25 matches and then do statistics for them. I'm about halfway through, but I completely lost my motivation at the start of the year. So I'm hoping to get back into that. That's hopefully something where the statistics is interesting, so you can take
Mm.
that and then compare it. And more recently, I'm almost finished writing a Collision versus Dynamite article, which will hopefully be more constructive and less divisive than the title suggests.
Yeah.
So yeah, also we also have like an AW weekly
Mm.
article on the website which people really should check out. I don't actually do any of the writing for that, but it's like a collaborative process, and I think the product is about as good a review as you're going to find anywhere, if I do say so myself.
No, I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think the people you're working with as well, across the channel, people who are contributing to all these different reviews, year-end reviews, award shows. Everybody's
Mm-hmm.
really balanced in their approach, and everybody's quite respectful of each other's views, which is quite refreshing itself to touch on earlier.
Uh,
But listen, Craig, first of all, thank you very much for your time, and a huge congratulations again on your wonderful good news coming at the end of the summer.
yes.
If you do manage to escape down to London at any point of the summer, or you're over in Ireland at any point, please give me a shout. And thank you once more time again for all your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No problem at all. Listen, everybody, please check out Craig's work at Craig William at PWMusings on Twitter as well. ProWrestlingMusings.com is a huge amount of insightful wrestling analysis and statistical analysis as well, which I thoroughly enjoy because I'm a wrestling nose and a nerd, but I know that's not for everybody. But listen, please do go check it out. Thank you very much for everybody for listening, and we'll see you soon.